In 1967, the Beach Boys were supposed to change music forever. But instead of Smile transforming their career, it destroyed it. And the craziest part, no one even heard the album for almost 40 years. It became the most famous album never released, a project so mysterious it nearly broke Brian Wilson's mind. This is the story of Smile, the record that I guess was too good to exist. In 1966, Brian Wilson was on top of the world creatively. He had stopped touring with the Beach Boys just so that he could focus on writing and recording. I quit touring because I wanted to write songs at home. I couldn't write on the road very good. I wanted to write at home so I could produce tracks for the boys to come in and sing to. The result was Pet Sounds, an album that broke every single rule in pop music. It was a huge change of direction for the surf rock band. While it didn't sell as well in the US compared to the earlier stuff, it became a touchstone for artists everywhere. It's often cited as your favourite band's favourite album. It especially impressed the Beatles. And, of course, it was huge in the UK. Well, we know about music here. I don't need to go into, on this video, how important the album Pet Sounds was in the 60s and how it holds up today. It's a masterpiece, a monumental achievement by a band that delivered something completely left field for the music that they were normally delivering. But Brian wasn't satisfied. He believed he could go even further with his compositions. He wanted to make a teenage symphony to God. In the late summer of 1966, the Beach Boys' leader began work on their follow-up to Pet Sounds, an album briefly named Dumb Angel. Because Brian loved to laugh and make people laugh, the name Smile was almost the only choice. Van Dyke and I wanted to make a title that would catch people's ears, so they would want to hear it. So we said Smile. To help write the lyrics, Brian brought in Van Dyke Parks. He was a young musician and poet known for his surreal wordplay and love of American culture. This was a change from his regular songwriting partner and cousin Mike Love. Together, Van Dyke and Brian began crafting songs that were unlike anything else at the time. Pet Sounds had been an emotional album for Brian to write. He didn't want to go through the same process making Smile. I really had had enough of getting too far into music. After we were done with Pet Sounds, I said it's time to not get quite so far into music. The emotions got a little bit too intense for me. The songs were very personal. Working with Van Dyke was a way that the words weren't quite so personal for me. My wanting to work with Van Dyke was intellectual. I didn't tell the boys, it was a decision I made. But by not telling the rest of the band, he may have already put the first nail in the coffin. The way Brian wrote Smile was revolutionary. Instead of working on songs from start to finish, he recorded little pieces of music, tiny sections called modules. Each one might be just a few seconds or a few bars long. He planned to later stitch them together like a puzzle, moving them around until they formed a bigger musical picture. This modular approach was completely new for the 1960s. Brian saw music like film editing, short scenes that could be rearranged in order to tell a story. One melody could suddenly melt into another. He filled the studio with strange instruments. Banjos, harpsichords, cellos, slide whistles, and organs. Hell, he even had people crunching celery for percussion. His vision for the album's meaning was bold. He wanted to celebrate America's beauty and its absurdity. So he focused on America's railroads, its farms, spirituality, humour, and heartbreak. He wanted the lyrics to tell the story of a road trip from Plymouth Rock all the way to Blue Hawaii. But as the sessions continued, trouble began to grow. Brian's perfectionism was well known throughout town. He'd spend hours or even days chasing just one sound. Brian was obsessed, what you'd call a workaholic now, but he never professed, I'm doing this because he had to kick the Beatles' ass, or I've got a deadline and they're bugging me. It was always just about the music. It was always just exploring. He constantly wanted to do things that no one else had done. Brian was very particular about the way that he worked. He once ordered 8 truckloads of sand to be delivered to his house. With it, he built a sandbox around his piano so that he could run his toes through the sand while composing songs. It helped him get in the zone. Quite the Beach Boy, really. Meanwhile, and this is no reference to what I've just said, Brian's mental health was starting to break down. He'd always been a little bit sensitive and anxious, but the stress of trying to top Pet Sounds made things worse. And he was experimenting with LSD, which sometimes inspired him, but also fueled his paranoia. About his first experience, he says, "About a year ago, I took a full dose of LSD, and later, another time, I took a smaller dose. And I learned a lot of things like patience, understanding. I can't teach you or tell you what I learned from taking LSD, but I consider it a very religious experience." But a decade later, he would appear on Mike Douglas's talk show and say, "I did my dose of LSD, it shattered my mind, and I came back, thank God, I don't know in how many pieces." He can't seem to make up his mind on the impact that LSD had on him during this period. It's very contradictory. In the book Smile, he says, "In 2004, during the making of Beautiful Dreamer, Brian told me he began experiencing auditory hallucinations after his first LSD trip. After I took LSD, I was glad I did, because it gave me a deeper understanding of myself and my music. It opened up my ability to create music and sing and gave me a deeper feeling about music, a deeper understanding of my feelings, my musical feelings." So he was glad to have taken it then. But then David Leaf goes on to say, in 2005 on the Charlie Rose show, when asked what he might have done differently in his life, he said, "I would not have taken LSD. It killed me. It ruined me. It put my mind away. It was a rough, rough drug." So what happened, Brian? What aren't you telling us? Did it fry your brain, or did it give you the creativity that you needed? Or was it a little bit of both? And were there any other drugs that you were doing? I think he was probably doing speed, some kind of uppers at the time, and drinking, but I think they helped him just work longer hours. I don't think they got in the way at all.
Drugs is the biggest red herring in the Brian Wilson story I've heard so far. I just don't buy it.
Tensions also rose within the band. The band were a family quite literally, and Brian was the songwriter, so technically it was his job to ensure that his family were doing okay, financially speaking. Some of the Beach Boys, let's not beat around the bush, it's Mike Love, didn't understand what Brian and Van Dyke were trying to do. The lyrics seemed too weird, too abstract. Mike Love didn't want to sing those words. He wanted more Beach Boys hits, more of the same. Brian was now caught between his art, his dreams, looking after his family, and the band's commercial success. Well, he began to withdraw. Record label pressure didn't help either. Capitol Records wanted a hit, and they didn't know what to make of Brian's strange experiments. They hated Pet Sounds. The deadline passed again and again. The more time that went on, the harder it became for Brian to finish anything. Never mind Smile exactly how he imagined it. But the Beach Boys had released Good Vibrations in October of 1966, a track originally meant for Smile. It was a massive hit. It went #1 in America. It sold over 1 million copies in its first few weeks. So why were the record labels so against Brian pursuing a sound similar to the one on Good Vibrations? Everyone thought that Smile would just be bigger and filled with songs as big as Good Vibrations. What was the problem then? Why couldn't these straight-laced record executives understand that change is part of evolution? People were not always going to keep buying happy songs about surfing. And in the end, they didn't. By early 1967, the situation had reached a breaking point. Van Dyke Parks walked away from the project after months of tension and conflict. He later said when asked why he left, he just felt like he wasn't wanted. I wonder who it was that made him feel like that. After this, Brian grew more isolated, often cancelling sessions or even showing up late. He began to feel like the world was watching him fail. In May 1967, after nearly a year of work, Brian completely abandoned the project. The tapes were left unfinished and scattered. In September, the band needed an album to release, so the band released Smiley Smile, a rushed, stripped-down album that reused some of Smile's songs in a smaller but weirder way. Songs like Heroes and Villains, Vegetables, and Wonderful didn't sound like they did for Smile. If you're like me, you're going to be asking, what the hell was going on? Were the Beach Boys imploding? Had the relationships between the touring group and Brian reached a breaking point? Had Brian reached a breaking point? Did they resent Brian for getting so much media attention? Did Brian feel bad that he was the focus of the press's attention? I'll tell you from my heart, in 1967, the reasons why I didn't finish Smile was Mike didn't like it. I thought it was too experimental. I thought that the fire tape was too scary. I thought that people wouldn't understand where my head was at. Those are the reasons. Perhaps most simply, Mike didn't find Van Dyke Parks' lyrics relatable, and he didn't think that the Beach Boy concert audiences would get them. So in 2004, after all these years, Brian blamed Mike for it. It wasn't the drugs, it wasn't the attention or the pressure. I'd grown up thinking that he'd crumbled over the pressure of trying to top the Beatles. Nope. According to him, it was his cousin who made him abandon the project altogether. It wasn't a Beach Boys record. It didn't sound like one, so it wasn't right for the group. How awful that your own family can make you feel like that. So to put this into context, can you imagine being alive in Britain in 1997? Oasis are one of the biggest groups in the world at this point in time. You can't wait to hear the record that's been teased to you from the press and from tiny little snippets. Then you get this huge mega song, and it's probably the best thing that you've ever heard from this group. And then all of a sudden it's shelved and you never hear about it again. And it's back to surfing and California and fun.
I've never known anything like this before, where we heard about Smile being made at the time when we were in the 60s, and we were so excited, we were waiting for it, and rumours were it was great, but we never heard anything. And it was coming out and we were waiting for it, and it never happened. We waited in vain.
I realised that I had to stop. Smile was killing me. It might have killed the Beach Boys too if we'd kept going. I've been back in this town so long and love for the city. So he put his family first. And at the heart of all this, I think this has always been Brian's problem all along. He felt that first and foremost he had to look after his family, and he chose to put that above any artistic integrity. During the recording of Smile, Paul McCartney went round to visit Brian in Los Angeles, and while there he played him an early demo of She's Leaving Home from the Sgt. Pepper sessions. By this point, Brian had heard Strawberry Fields Forever, and I often think when I heard that story, did he think, well, they're doing what I want to do, but better. And they're doing it without all the resistance and all the mental strain. And yes, I write here with self-righteous indignation and genuine sadness how different Brian's life, the Beach Boys' career, and even the world of popular music might have been had the Beach Boys just done what he asked with a smile on their faces. So let's put into a little bit of a timeline, because these next few events happened in quite short order really, and they did dictate a lot of how the Beach Boys went on in the rest of the 60s. So in May of 67, it was reported that Brian had shelved Smile. And then on June the 1st, 1967, the Beatles' masterpiece, Sgt. Pepper's, was released in the US. And then that same month, the Beach Boys cancelled their appearance at the Monterey Pop Festival. The band were in a complete freefall. We were supposed to headline the Monterey Pop Festival, but at the last minute, Brian backed out. Monterey was a turning point in rock and roll. Overnight, the whole scene changed and we felt as though we've been passed by. They were failing on their chance to capitalise being the voices of a new cultural movement, to be America's answer to the Beatles. Anyway, critics were puzzled, fans were confused, and sadly the dream was over. The Beach Boys would never reach those true artistic heights, and I think they were more than capable of reaching them under Brian Wilson. I'm not exactly sure if Smile would have done that for them, but no doubt it would have been a stepping stone for them. One for which they could have built their next album off the back of, and then the next one, and then the next one. They could have kept pushing it, kept reinventing what they were trying to do. But after the Smile debacle, Brian no doubt felt that he couldn't write what he wanted to write, or say what he wanted to say. In his mind, he could never be a Lennon or a McCartney, which is ironic for the man that the media claimed controlled his brothers. It seemed like it was actually the other way around. Then Brian retreated from public life. He stayed mostly inside his home, surrounded by friends, therapists, and sometimes strangers who fed him his own lies. The genius who had written God Only Knows and Wouldn't It Be Nice seemed completely lost. But as Brian lost his way in the late 70s and the early 80s, finishing Smile was no longer what his friends were most concerned about. I saw him at the Westbury Music Fair in 1981. Brian weighed about £325, was chain smoking at the piano. The only reason I went was that Carl wasn't there and Brian was going to be singing God Only Knows and Good Vibrations. I wanted to see if he had anything left in the tank. He didn't. I left at half time. Yet, even though Smile was never released, people couldn't stop talking about it. Rumours spread about the lost masterpiece, the album that might have changed the face of popular music. Bootleg tapes then began circulating for obsessed fans. Over the years, bits of Smile showed up on other albums. Surf's Up appeared on a 1971 Beach Boys record of the same name. I've done a little video on that one, so go check that one out. And Cabin Essence appeared on 2020 in 1969. Each fragment gave fans a little glimpse of what Smile might have been, but it doesn't quite cut the mustard. By the 1980s, the 1990s, Smile had become one of rock's greatest what-ifs. Then something miraculous happened. In the early 2000s, Brian began performing again. He had gone through decades of therapy and rediscovered some peace in his mind again. Look, it's very complicated and all this needs more time for the story to be truly told. Just go with me on this one. I'll do another video another day. So, encouraged by friends and fans, he decided to revisit Smile. In 2004, nearly 40 years after it was abandoned, Brian Wilson finally completed and performed Smile live. It was now titled Brian Wilson Presents Smile for legal reasons. Working closely with Van Dyke Parks again, he assembled a new version using modern technology and a clearer sense of structure. Critics called it a triumph. Not because it perfectly matched his 1966 version, but because he just gave the music life again. And then in 2011, the original Beach Boys recordings were finally released as the Smile Sessions. Engineers carefully pieced together old tapes following Brian's notes and memories of how the album might have sounded. It was never going to be perfect or exactly what Brian had in mind, but it was as close as anyone was ever going to get. We think people are now ready to understand where it was coming from. Back then, no one was ready for it. Part of what makes Smile so powerful is that for decades, it just didn't exist. It was the mystery around it that helped build its legacy. So because it wasn't around, fans built their own versions from bootlegs. And every rumour that they heard about Brian and what went on during those sessions just added to the legend. And when you listen to the Smile sessions today, Smile sounds surprisingly modern. Its cut and paste style feels like early sampling, but it's a weird album. It's got a mix of humour and orchestras and crazy sound effects. But I think they've kind of predicted everything that psychedelic rock would go on for the next couple of years after that and experimental pop. Astonishingly, Brian was just doing this all with 1960s tape machines, literally just cutting together and gluing pieces of music together all by hand. Brian probably spent decades haunted by Smile, and now he could finally complete it on his own terms. In my opinion, Smile stands as one of the most fascinating albums ever made. Not just for the music itself, though that is a good album, but for the story behind it. And it reminds us that art isn't always about success or even completion. Sometimes the journey's more interesting, and that can be the thing that inspires generations. But I love asking questions. What if it had come out in 1967? What might have happened? What other music might the Beach Boys have released? How would it have held up in that amazing year of music? Sitting among classics like Surrealistic Pillow, Sgt. Pepper's, the Doors' first album, Hyper at the Gates of Dawn. Unfortunately, we'll never know. Thanks for watching, all you rock and rollers. So, tell me, what's your favourite song from Smile? And while you're at it, go click like and subscribe. I've worked really hard on this video. I feel like I've been in full Brian Wilson mode, researching everything. I think I need a little bit of a break. But I do think that the Smile sessions and what went on exactly in them truly deserve a longer form video. So maybe that's one for the future if you guys like this one. Anyway, go on, that's enough. I'll see you all down the road.